Hey everyone, I'm Jared Evans, Club Support Officer at Leisure Networks. I'll be your virtual MC for this webinar. Welcome to our COVID-19 recovery webinar for athletics clubs across the Barwon Region. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wadawurrung people. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. In terms of structure for the webinar, we'll go into Leisure Networks Explain, so a bit of who we are and what we do. Then we'll go into the club research project, so the purpose of the project as a whole, and then we'll go into some findings from the survey results. We'll then move into unpacking the four key themes, so volunteer retention, mental health, COVID-19 uncertainty and sponsorships. We really hope you enjoy the webinar. Let's get into it.
Now, a little bit about Leisure Networks. The majority of the business is centred around supporting people with a disability through the National Disability Insurance Scheme, or the NDIS. But Leisure Networks is a regional sports assembly for the Barwon Region, coordinating physical activity initiatives and supporting clubs and associations to further enhance their capacity both on and off the playing arena. Leisure Networks prides itself on being relevant, creative and trusted, which is driven through trademark behaviours to ensure we're accountable, keeping us on track and connecting to community. To find out more about the organisation as a whole, head to the Leisure Networks website, leisurenetworks.org, or find us on various social media platforms. Within the Sport Rec and Hull team at Leisure Networks, there are three key operational pillars when it comes to the work we deliver: funded, Allen Consulting, and new initiatives. We're extremely fortunate to receive funding from government agencies to support our work in the community. Firstly, and through Sport and Recreation Victoria's Together More Active funding, there are two main components to this funding, which is focused on club capacity building, and we're talking one-to-one direct support to community clubs, workshops which over the last few years have been webinars and delivered online, and have touched on topics around mental health, financial strategies, volunteer recruitment, retention, marketing and communications, just to name a few, and Access for All Abilities, or AAA, increasing opportunities for people with disability to engage in sport and active recreation through key stakeholder partnerships in collaboration with community clubs and organisations. Secondly is our funding through Vic Health, which primarily focuses on community health initiatives and outcomes. In previous years, there's been a push to increase physical activity with the 55 plus age group and to increase women and girls' participation in sport, both on and off the field. In more recent times, the lens has pivoted towards the youth sector, providing young people with a greater voice to create change and hopefully find the solution to the 15 to 19 age group drop-off and re-engagement when it comes to physical activity. The second pillar in the middle of the screen is Allen Consulting, which is our fee-for-service arm and is making big strides in Metro Melbourne, but also partnering with local government and governing bodies to deliver a number of key projects. We'll break down the fee-for-service arm a little bit further in the next slide. And thirdly, our new initiatives, the Barwon Game Changer, which was funded through the Office for Women in Sport and has made a significant impact in levelling the playing field for women in sport, particularly when it comes to leadership. The Power to Pedal program, a cycling program for young people with autism, and was delivered through the Vic Health Innovation Funding. Mini Movers, which is a physical literacy program delivered in early learning centres, and the Allen Connect podcast, which covers key trends and topics with industry experts, with episodes focusing on most of the top areas of concern through this project. And the podcast can be found on most podcast platforms for your listening pleasure. As previously mentioned, Allen Consulting, or fee-for-service, is one of the key operational pillars of the Sport Rec and Hull team at Leisure Networks, and the service areas are broken down a little bit further on this slide. I would like for you to take particular notice at the strategic planning and club workshop section under capacity building, which might be of interest to you and your club. Leisure Networks is happy to support clubs with grant applications and submissions for strategic planning. A state government sporting club grants program is open 2 times per year, with one category of the grant focusing on operational capacity. This is particularly important as local councils are moving in the direction of all community clubs needing a business or strategic plan in order to seek financial or operational support from local government. When it comes to inclusion projects, Leisure Networks has recently worked with the Southwest Sports Academy in delivering an Inclusion Club workshop series. We've also worked with local government, many local governments in fact, in this case with the Melton City Council in delivering a Women in Sport breakfast. We've also delivered a mental health project in delivering educational sessions to over 200 clubs in conjunction with Headspace. The list goes on, but the opportunities are endless if your club is looking for support in educating, upskilling, or increased participation for your members. Lastly, Leisure Networks has expertise in facility activation and the development of participation plans and feasibility studies when it comes to existing infrastructure or identifying the needs and community trends for new builds. Michael King's details are on the bottom of this slide for any further information on the LN Consulting arm.
Thanks, Tim, for providing us an overview of Leisure Networks, who we are and what we do. Next we'll move into a bit of an overview of the club research project by the club support officers Bree Beckley and Sabal McSparran.
So over the past 4 to 5 months, Leisure Networks has been taking a leading role in a statewide project that has been targeting sporting clubs, leagues and associations. So the purpose and aim of the club research project has been to better understand the position of these regional sporting clubs after the COVID-19 pandemic. We really aim to understand what the major area of concerns are for clubs moving forward and to use the insights and data to inform which areas regional sport Victoria should be focusing on to better service and assist and direct funding into the areas of most need. So throughout the 4 to 5 months at Leisure Networks, we have really loved talking to local clubs, leagues and associations within our local Barwon region. Through these conversations, we've really had the chance to check in with clubs and see how they are, discuss how clubs have coped throughout COVID and what the future looks like. We were able to discuss how clubs have fared in relation to membership retention, volunteer retention, and if there has been an increase or decrease in these areas. Positively, through these conversations, we've also had some great good news stories and innovations that have come as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Here are some findings that have come from a statewide level in result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the club research project. So 58% of surveyed sports clubs, leagues and associations stated that they were concerned about multiple areas relating to the impact of COVID-19. 37% stated that COVID-19 uncertainty was their major area of concern moving forward. Over 17% stated that they have serious mental health concerns for individuals, and 14% were most concerned about membership retention and whether members would return. 12% were concerned about the lack of volunteers. Continuing on with some key findings and quick statistics from the research, 42% of organisations reported a decrease in participants over the past 12 months. 30% saw a decrease in volunteers, and positively 22% reported an increase in participation. 55% of organisations listed grant writing as the main area that they were needing support in, and finally, mental health first aid courses or mental health awareness workshops were the second most form of requested assistance.
Following on from the statewide findings and data, our club research team had a number of meetings and phone calls with multiple different sporting clubs across the Barwon region to get a better understanding of how and if sport in the Barwon region has significantly been impacted by COVID-19. As you can see in the graph, clubs across the Barwon region have identified two clear major concern areas, these being the retention and availability of volunteers and COVID-19 uncertainty. Other areas that clubs have reported as concerns are membership retention, mental health of their members, and financial viability. As you can see, 56% of clubs in the Barwon region have reported that their membership numbers have decreased. It seems as though not everyone has experienced a decrease in membership from COVID-19, as 25% of clubs have also reported that they experienced an increase during this time. This is such a great positive to see. Following on from membership numbers, it is great to see that 41% of clubs have reported that there has also been no change in their volunteer numbers. However, 48% of clubs have still reported that they have experienced a decrease. To round out our findings for sporting clubs in the Barwon region, clubs have reported that grant writing, media and communications assistance and sponsorship servicing would be of significant benefit if these tasks were able to be outsourced free of charge. We hope that these findings can shine a light on key areas that can assist you, your club and its association moving forward.
Thanks, Breen Val, for providing an overview of the club research project. Next up, we've got Program Coordinator Tim Downs and Club Support Officer Sabal McSparron to present on volunteer recruitment and retention.
Volunteering Australia defines the act of volunteering as time willingly given for the common good and without financial gain. Volunteers contribute to the social and economic value of sport, especially at community level. Clubs would not be able to run without volunteers who fill many critical roles, including coaches, team managers, administrative boards and committee members. Volunteering is a great way to meet and connect with others and strengthens ties to communities. Clubs who have created a strong and positive volunteering culture are much more likely to be successful, achieve goals, and have a strong sense of belonging between the club and its participants. Hit pause for a second and have a think about your reason for volunteering. What is your why? What are the bits you love? And the bits you find incredibly frustrating. Understanding what is holding people back from getting or staying involved at your club will help your recruitment efforts and keep your current members happy and engaged. Some common reasons for not volunteering include perceptions of need and the jobs needing to be done, a lack of time, lack of interest, confidence, leadership, feeling that you need to be a change maker, compliance issues of not doing things well enough. Sport clubs do not have established ways of understanding and designing for different cohorts. This leads to individuals being matched to roles that do not align with their individual interests and motivations, and a one-size-fits-all approach to volunteer management. Volunteers are often left to undertake roles with little support or training. For many, this limits their ability to achieve personal and club goals. Volunteers need both training and support to a mix of functional, e.g. how to do their role, and emotional, e.g. how to get to know the club community. Sport volunteer roles often expand over time and leave people feeling stretched and burnt out. For many, they feel a deep sense of obligation to the sport and the club and a sense that there isn't anyone else who would step in if they were there to resign. It is important to show potential volunteers that the pros of volunteering greatly outweigh the cons. Volunteering Australia has found that people who volunteer report being happier and healthier both mentally and physically. The sports sector has witnessed the impacts of a constantly changing world, including changes to the way people work, family structures and communication. Many environmental changes such as busy lifestyles, desire for more flexibility in sport and recreation offerings, including social and modified activities and constant distractions with technology, are creating new challenges for sport and sport volunteering. The impacts of COVID-19 have rippled into sport with risk around return to playing and volunteering. The COVID-19 pandemic has significantly impacted sport in Australia, and the role of the volunteer is now more important than ever. We need our volunteers to help rebuild our sporting communities and contribute to our social and economic recovery.
Here we're going to be looking at attracting volunteers. So before recruiting volunteers, it is really important that your club understands what it is that grabs people into volunteering, what attracts them to volunteer. In understanding this, clubs can then create an environment and culture that attracts and engages volunteers. The main reason that people volunteer is to make a positive difference, but there are many more other motives such as the responsibility and trust that is placed within them, being listened to, solving problems as a team, and also the praise and recognition that comes from being in one of these volunteer roles. Volunteering is a means for people to stay connected, make a positive difference within their community, to gain new skills and experience, to support their family members in sport, and to meet new people. Having a club culture that supports these needs will assist in attracting volunteers, contribute to volunteer satisfaction, and also assist in retaining volunteers. Background work should take place before your club begins the recruitment drive for volunteers. By doing this, your recruitment process will take a much more targeted approach at recruiting the right person and skill set to fulfill your club volunteer roles. Firstly, your club should know exactly what volunteer roles are needed with a position description designed for each of these roles. This will allow your club to understand what skill sets, capabilities, and characteristics you are sourcing. Here it is really important to know your target audience, such as do you require or would you really like somebody with a financial background to take on the secretary role at your club. From here, having a clearer picture of what is needed will give your club a better understanding of how to go about the recruitment drive. For example, through understanding what it is that your club needs in order to successfully fulfill the role in terms of skill sets or capabilities, you'll be able to identify if this person currently exists within your club or if you may need to look externally. Next, it is important to understand the needs and interests of the people you are trying to attract to the role and how you can try and meet these needs. This could be understanding the time constraints of potential volunteers and therefore breaking down the role into smaller, more manageable roles. From understanding roles, ideal capabilities, skill sets, and the needs of potential volunteers, clubs should then turn their attention to recruitment strategies or what recruitment strategies would work best in order to target and attract ideal volunteers. We'll go over these strategies within the next slide. Here we're going to look at some strategies that clubs can use when looking to recruit volunteers. So clubs firstly should look to include a volunteer coordinator within their club structure. Volunteer coordinators play a vital role within the recruitment of new volunteers and providing ongoing direction and support once volunteers are engaged. The focus of the volunteer coordinator is to ensure that every volunteer feels valued, is informed, and is confident in their ability to undertake tasks and responsibilities to fulfill their role. Volunteer coordinators can be responsible for taking new volunteers through an induction process, providing volunteers with relevant training, policies and procedures, and matching appropriate skill sets and interests to volunteer positions. Having a volunteer coordinator within your club that provides great support and recognition creates an environment that promotes the retention of volunteers and volunteer satisfaction. Some other recruitment strategies include things such as registration forms or sign-up boards, club intro night or social functions. This is a great space for you to let people of your club know what opportunities or roles there are within volunteering at your club. You can try and recruit in pairs or in trios. So an example of this is again breaking down larger roles into say 2 separate smaller roles so that it makes it more attractive for people to want to take this on. You can also try and target people and actually ask the question of them, say for example, hey, we know that you have this particular skill set and we think that you'd be great in this role. Would you ever think about taking it on? You know, it makes people consider their skill sets and maybe, hey, I might be good in that role. So that's a really good way of doing it as well. You can also look externally of your club. So you could look at things such as school student placements or university placements, or your maybe people volunteering from the community hub. It's a great place to look. And also succession planning, so making sure that there are steps in place for the future of your club. After looking at recruitment strategies, we're now looking at 4 steps to successful recruitment. So number 1, we have identify volunteer roles. So we have gone over this before, but identifying volunteer roles provides structure to tasks and responsibilities undertaken by volunteers, as well as providing a clear indication of the number of roles that need to be filled for the successful operation of the club. Number 2, we have create a position description or task list. So position descriptions form a real essential tool of the recruitment campaign. It is a way of attracting and sourcing suitable volunteers for roles, as well as ensuring that the volunteer position is both meaningful and beneficial for the organisation, but also for the volunteer. Creating position descriptions displays to the potential volunteer that the club has taken time to detail the tasks, responsibilities, and capabilities for each role. The detail in the position description allows for potential volunteers to feel informed and confident in what duties they will be stepping into. A position description also allows for potential volunteers to basically self-screen in considering their own capabilities in taking on the role. The position description allows for consistency and transparency when discussing the role and tasks. When interviewing or selecting volunteers, it also assists in matching appropriate skill sets to roles. Importantly, position descriptions form a tool to assess the contribution of the volunteer and if they are performing within their role, or maybe if further support or training might be required. Number 3, we have identified the ideal volunteer profile. So you'll be able to use the position description as a tool in identifying the ideal volunteer profiles for roles. The volunteer profile can be made up of skill sets, capabilities, and characteristics that a suitable volunteer would ideally have to successfully fulfill the role. Clubs can use this information to target potential volunteers that align well with this. So number 4, we have establish where and how to find these ideal volunteers. So are these people internal or external to your club? By identifying the ideal volunteer profiles, your club will be able to have a better gauge if this is someone currently within the club, or maybe if your club needs to look externally. So having an understanding and curiosity in the profession's interests, previous work or study of club members can be really beneficial in this regard. So for example, you may be aware that maybe somebody within your club is studying media and communication, or has like a really high interest in media and communication. So you could potentially ask them if the role needed to be filled, if they would consider taking on the role of social media manager, because you have that background knowledge that is what they're interested in, that is what they may be studying, so they may be a really great fit for the role. So yeah, that is a wrap up of our 4 steps to successful recruitment.
4 steps to successful volunteer management. Number 1, document and effective processes. Define and create your roles, create role descriptions before you recruit your team. This will help your club understand and better manage your volunteers throughout their involvement. Role descriptions should be reviewed on a regular basis. Consider compliance requirements, such as working with children checks and other screening processes relevant to the position. Orientation or induction processes enable your volunteers to perform their role as required and ensures they understand their responsibilities and their rights within the club. A volunteer guide or induction kit is a great resource to talk about the history of the club, the benefits of volunteering, key contact details, club policies and procedures, volunteer code of conduct, and a welcome note. Number 2, support. Try and get to know your volunteers and make them feel welcome. Sometimes a simple hello, remembering their name, or asking how they're getting on can make all the difference. Make sure volunteers have a contact person to take any questions, issues, or problems when it comes to volunteering. Spend time alongside your volunteers to get to know them and their role. Keep in touch with your volunteers, as this could be done in a lot of different ways. For example, face-to-face meetings, a conversation over coffee, by telephone, email, text, and or letter. Number 3, recognition and appreciation. We will discuss this further in the next slide, but volunteers need to feel both valued and valuable, and to understand how their role contributes to the club goals and vision. Volunteers who feel valued are more likely to be loyal to the organisation and to become long-term volunteers, which is what we're all striving for. Number 4, ongoing training. Training volunteers around their roles and responsibilities will help to maximise their positive impact on the club. It will also help to keep them engaged and volunteering for longer. Providing ongoing training will help volunteers feel confident in their own skills and capabilities in their role. Requirements may differ depending on the position and the responsibilities of the volunteer, but a great way to reward volunteers is to offer opportunities for them to upskill and to learn. Some examples of acknowledging your volunteers might be personal or public praise, acknowledgement events, handwritten notes of thanks, years of service awards, club champion awards, social media shout-outs, volunteer thanks functions, celebrate International Volunteers Day. Most importantly, develop a culture in your club that truly values its volunteers.
We've gone over some of these throughout the volunteer recruitment and retention theme, but we just have some top tips and hints and takeaways to wrap up this section. So number 1, change really does need time and understanding. Number 2 is target people and ask. This is a really great and successful recruitment strategy. Number 3 is break big jobs into smaller, more manageable jobs. So we've talked about this one before, but just breaking some of those larger club roles into smaller, 2 or 3 smaller roles can be really beneficial in attracting volunteers to the role. Number 4 is people must really know exactly what they have to do and what they're stepping into and how long it will actually take them. And number 4 for here is we have provide leadership and mentor. So really provide that leadership and a mentor role to your volunteers. It'll help them feel more supported and really go a long way in retaining volunteers. So just continuing on with some more top tips and hints. So fully understand why people do and don't volunteer and use that to your advantage of why people do. Make it your business to do yourself out of a job. Create a culture that attracts others. Acknowledge that there is more than one way of doing things. So some people might have an old school way of doing things. Some people might have maybe a new idea of how to do something. So it's really important to acknowledge that there is more than one way to do things. Copy ideas from other successful clubs. So you might see another club doing something that's working really well and think maybe you can adopt that for your club. And say thank you, thank you, thank you. Like praise and recognition is really important in volunteer recruitment and also mainly volunteer retention. We've included here some websites that are really great resources for all things volunteering, whether that be volunteer recruitment, volunteer retention, strategies, guides. These websites have a lot of information that can be really useful for sporting clubs.
Thanks Tim and Sval for presenting on volunteer recruitment and retention. Next up we've got Kylie from Headspace in Geelong to present on mental health. Kylie will take us through some really beneficial Headspace resources that I think would be great for community sporting clubs to utilise. At the end of Kylie's presentation, I might touch on a couple of questions coming from a club perspective. Thanks Kylie, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. All right, so hi everybody, my name's Kylie. I am the Community Engagement Officer at Headspace Geelong. Thank you, Jared, for the acknowledgement of country. Again, just wanting to echo that we acknowledge we are gathered on the traditional lands of the Wadawurrung people, pay our respects to elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be listening and watching this presentation today. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about who Headspace is, what services we offer young people in our community, as well as going through ways that you can support a young person going through some hard times. So just to start, I thought it might be helpful to touch on what Headspace is and who we are. So we are a national youth mental health service, but we offer support in 4 key areas, which is mental health, physical health, work and study, and also supporting young people who might have issues with drug and alcohol. Our local centres in the region, so around here, we've got Headspace in Geelong, which is where I am based. So we are at 105 Yarra Street in Geelong, which is just near the McDonald's. We also have a satellite site, which essentially means kind of like a sibling site, a little brother, to our main Headspace Centre, which is in Ocean Grove, which is just located next to the library. That centre just opened up this year. We'll also have a new centre opening up in Corio in the new year, and then other services can be accessed through Drysdale through contacting Headspace Ocean Grove. So to start, I just thought it might be important to touch on a little bit about young people and mental health and what that is. I'm going to be reading from some notes, so if you are watching my face, I do apologise. There's just a lot of information to get through, but yeah, bear with me. Okay, so the journey from childhood to adulthood is full of physical, social, emotional and behavioural changes. With so much happening, it can be difficult to know the difference between normal behaviour, such as occasional moodiness, irritability, and an emerging mental health concern. If a young person is showing signs of developing a mental health concern, it's important that they are supported by their family, friends, and health professionals early on. The good news is, with the right support and strategies, things can get better for young people in your community. When a young person experiences good mental health, it helps them be resilient, flexible, adaptable, and socially connected. Feeling down, tense, angry, anxious, or moody are all normal emotions, but when these feelings persist for a few weeks, so they start to linger on a little bit longer or interfere with daily life, it can be an early indicator that a young person is experiencing mental health concern. If you think that there are any young people that you're connected with, whether it be through the sporting club or in your own life, might be experiencing some mental health challenges, it's important to let them know that you're there to support them and that there's also a lot of professional support available. So things that impact a young person's mental health. So we've got biological factors. This is, I think, things like family, history of mental health concerns, adverse early life experiences. So that's things like abuse, neglect, the impact of death or significant loss or a trauma in their life. Individual psychological factors. So that's things like a person's self-esteem, the feeling of needing to be perfect, how they can cope with something, or even the way that they think and view the world. Noting that this is really different person to person. Current circumstances, so things like stress from work or school, perhaps if there's something going on at home with the family, maybe it's financial issues. Another really big thing is peer relationships. So young people, I suppose, the most important thing to a lot of young people is their relationship with their peers, and also challenges in the family. Serious illness or physical injury, so pretty self-explanatory. If a young person has experienced this or someone close to them, that can definitely have an impact on their mental health. And then alcohol and drugs is also listed here. I think it's important to touch on this. It's a time when young people are using or just experimenting, and this can also have an impact on someone's mental health. When to support a young person to seek help. I think it's important to step up when you do see somebody is changing. So these are some of the things that you might see in a young person, things to look for, changes in behaviour. So we've got withdrawing from school, sports, social events, mood changes, changes in appetite or sleep habits. If there is an increase or decrease, not decrease, that would be good, an increase in substance abuse or misuse, a young person expressing that they're feeling really worthless or being really critical of themselves, not feeling really good about who they are or what they're doing, lacking motivation to do things that they might have previously done quite easily, constant feeling of angst or worried, and also thoughts about suicide or self-harm. So often the first thing you notice is that somebody will withdraw and that they'll stop doing things that they once would do that made them happy. I guess the thing that's been really tricky over the last 20 odd months is that we've missed out on a lot of stuff. Everything's been at home because of the impact of COVID, so it's been tricky to gauge if a young person's withdrawing because they haven't been able to participate in things as much as they might have. So I think with things opening up, it's important to, I guess, keep track of maybe people that might be struggling with that re-engaging step, or finding it a little bit harder to adjust to life back to normal. So that's sort of that. On the topic of suicide and self-harm, it's really important to know that talking about this actually won't do any more harm. It's a tricky conversation to have, and it does feel uncomfortable, but by being able to sit with somebody who's talking about that, it's a really important space, and there are other people who can help a young person through that. So knowing who to go to for help or support about that's really important. And there's some incredible resources available online. So off the top of my head, you might be looking at websites like Reach Out or Are You OK, which is from Are You OK Day. And so they're two really good resources to check out with some like interactive tools on their web pages and help sheets and fact sheets for how to have these difficult conversations. Onto that, which is a nice segue, so where to seek help. I think what's really important is encouraging a young person or any person that you might notice is struggling with their mental health to seek out their natural supports, so people that they're close to that already have a relationship with this young person. So that could be your friends, family, key people in the life. So what we've got down here as well is coaches, it's mentors, it's other people, trusted adults in a young person's life. It's important because I guess there's a relationship already established there with trust, and with trust comes that support and a young person hopefully being able to talk about what's going on from them. Other supports in a wider network, you've got professional support, so that's through mental health services. Doctors are a really good resource, so your local GP or nurses. There's lots at school as well, so if a young person's either working or at school, they would likely have a wellbeing support officer at school or somebody at work that they might be able to seek support through. In terms of what we've got at Headspace, so Headspace Geelong and Headspace Ocean Grove, we do have a bit of a holistic approach to working with a young person. I suppose a young person could come in and they might be seeking support from a doctor about getting a sexual health check. And through a conversation that they have with this doctor, they then go, oh, we actually noticed that this young person's got a high level of drug and alcohol use, so we might refer them to this counselling. Or you've got a young person that comes in and they're having experiences of early onset, say, mental health, so it's anxiety or stressed about school. But then from that, we realise that they need support with something else, or they go through to see group work. So it's really good because it's a real holistic. So it looks at what's going on at home, it's what's going on with your peers, what's going on at school and other stuff, and just how you're coping and how that young person is thinking and viewing the world as a whole. It's all really individualised, and the important thing is that our services are free, also very youth friendly, and young people can access Headspace as many times as needed. So we are working with young people aged 12 to 25. We also offer support to their friends and family. So we can offer help for people that are supporting young people through a mental health issue. How to access Headspace is my next slide. So this is the important phone numbers. Young people can access our service by making contact themselves. We can also have other people in the life make contact on behalf of that young person to commence that process. So quite often we have parents or teachers call up and they make referrals for young people to get support. And it might just be getting them to get in and talk to a GP to start off with. So the phone numbers here, I've got Geelong Headspace, which is 5222 6690, Ocean Grove, which is 5243 0400. Headspace Geelong and Headspace Ocean Grove have also got websites. You can actually make a referral online to either centre. This is a little quick overview of what the website looks like. It's just a screenshot, so I can't actually scroll down through it. But this website has got listed in detail all of the services that we offer at Headspace Geelong. It also has, so if you look at the About section over here and scrolling down, that's where the referral tool is. So a young person can self-refer, or you can do a referral on behalf of a young person. Email address is there. You could literally just Google Headspace Geelong and it will pop up. This is the top result. Using the Headspace website, so I'm going to touch on this because I think it's a really good resource and a really great place to go if this is something that you're interested in. So headspace.org.au, it's been developed, I guess, for young people, it's developed for parents, it's developed for family and friends, and it's also developed for health professionals and schools. So the resources that are available online are able to be shared. We've got hard copies of most of this stuff in the centre, so I'm happy to distribute if there's anything that you're interested in finding. But basically what you can do here is, so there's this schools and health professionals, you would select that button and then you can go into a topic or area of your choosing. You can also create an account, which is up here on the top right. And by doing that, it actually allows you to keep all of your information that you're looking at, or all your fact sheets, in the one place. So you can create an account by saying you're, concerned about a young person 12 to 25, but it might just be something that you're interested in learning about yourself to increase your knowledge on how to support someone. Because a lot of these resources are relevant to not just to young people, but can be used with friends, family, with adults. It's all relevant and it's really easy to understand. And then what happens is, once you create an account, it comes up here and you can save topics that are relevant to you. So there's literally everything from grief, anxiety, supporting a young person who's self-harming, managing family conflict, and as well as some activities or fact sheets which focus on supporting a young person to get into life, or addressing things like healthy eating and different topics to make somebody have a healthy headspace. eHeadspace is another service which is available for young people. It's also available for family and friends. So if you are worried about a young person, not quite sure what to do, I would really encourage you seek out this service. It's free. It's available from 9 a.m. till 1 a.m. every day. You can access it either by making a phone call to the 1-800 number listed on the screen, or you can use web chat as well, which is via eheadspace.org.au. eHeadspace is staffed by mental health professionals, and it works 365 days of the year. So if you were working with a young person and you weren't quite sure how to support them, this would be a really great resource to tap into, just to help with the next steps, and depending on the needs of the young person, what sort of support would be next best for them. Now, in an emergency, so sometimes I suppose you might be faced with young people who might be presenting in crisis. They might be having suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation. We really encourage you to seek the support if it is a crisis and you need immediate assistance. Always to call 000. If you've got a young person who might be sitting in the club and they might be disclosing thoughts of suicide or self-harm, there are a number of services that you can access. Lifeline is a great one. It's 13 11 14, really quick turnaround time. The other service is Suicide Callback Service, and they're all trained counsellors to support a young person who is in that crisis state. The other number I've got listed here is the Barwon Health Access Team. So this is also a contact which is available free for the community, for the Geelong region, if you're wanting support or advice on how to support a young person. A lot of it can be a secondary consult, which means that you've got a situation or like a case study, so to speak, or not case study because it would be possibly a real life example, but you've got a young person perhaps that you're working with through the club, and you can explain to them that this young person's presenting like this, you've noticed that they're withdrawn, and they would provide you with information about other services in the area that you might be able to seek for support. This is further information about that. So 24 hours 7, I think that's the important thing. Headspace Geelong and Headspace Ocean Grove are not 24/7, so our working hours at Headspace Geelong are Monday to Friday 9 to 5. Ocean Grove, it's only Monday to Thursday, but this is a 24-hour service, and it's for mental health, drug and alcohol support, and then they will advise the next steps. Again, if it is an emergency, always contact 000. I've got this slide here because it's one of the most important and valuable slides I think that we can share. It goes through a range of support services that are available, and a lot of these are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we've got Beyond Blue, which is a mental health support service. They offer support for anyone, no age restrictions. Again, resources are available online as well as via phone. Headspace, so that's obviously us, a phone call to the 1-800 number from 9 a.m. to 1 a.m. daily. Kids Helpline, this is a really good resource, and majority of the young people that you would probably work with would have heard of it. It's 24/7 hour crisis support for young people 5 to 25. And again, their website's got some terrific resources, so some really good fact sheets on a whole range of topics from everything about drug and alcohol use to friendships. It's really great for young people. 1-800-RESPECT is a support line for people who have been impacted by sexual assault, domestic violence or abuse. It's 24/7 and a free call. Lifeline is the 24/7 crisis support suicide prevention. Suicide callback, again, touched on that, but it's a callback service where if somebody's in crisis, the counselling service will be offered immediately. Men's Line is for men, 24-hour service counselling for men, and Q-Life is for any of the young people who might be connected to a queer community, a really great resource as well. I think that's sort of the summary for us now. I will invite Jared to jump back on, but if there's anything that's come up, or if you want further information or clarification about any resources, my email address is here and I'm happy to be contacted.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Kylie. I think any sporting club that tuned into this will feel a bit more educated now as to how to guide their junior members through mental health struggles.
Yeah.
Definitely opened up my eyes to some resources and support services that are actually out there in regards to mental health. So really appreciate you coming on and presenting. Just got a couple of questions from my end, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Starting off with a bit of a scenario one. So if I'm a coach, teammate, committee member, anything like that, and a club member approaches me explaining they're experiencing poor mental health, I suppose what are my next steps to provide valuable assistance to this person?
Yeah, good question. So I think the first thing that I would encourage anybody to do if they are in that situation is to acknowledge that what this young person has club member has disclosed to you is really vulnerable, and thank them for sharing that with you. It is tricky because it's a bit of thanks for sharing that with me, but I think acknowledging that it is hard for people to talk up and it is hard to sort of ask for help, that's a really big thing, just to validate that person's been heard. Important to ask if they've talked with anybody else about this and see what other supports are in place. So for example, if you were working with a younger person, so under 16, I'd really encourage you to share that disclosure with the parent, with a trusted adult who's connected to that young person, a parent or guardian. Somebody that might be a little bit older, it might be saying, who else have you talked to about this? Can I help you to make a call to your doctor or to talk to somebody else in your life? Touching on that there is obviously a lot of support available. So all the services that I listed before are really great and cover the whole age range of our population. And I think the next thing is to come to like an agreed plan, like what you'll do next. So rather than just sitting with being told this, thanks for sharing that this has happened, what can we do to help you? And to have a bit of an agreed plan where that young person or whoever follows up and calls their psychologist or talks to their mum or dad about it. But then you also follow up. So check in on them, follow up, and then that will hopefully continue, a good conversation and allow that person to get some support with their mental health.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, some really good tips in there. Thanks for that. And just the second one, how do you go about approaching a club member who is displaying poor mental health symptoms, as you touched on? So mood changes, lacking of motivation, that kind of thing? Or is that something that you wait for them to speak to you or someone else about?
I think it's important not to wait. I think if you notice something and if your gut, a lot of the times it's your gut going, something's not right with that person. Well, what should I do? Take the step, because you're probably not going to do any harm by reaching out and asking someone how they're going. My advice is to consider the space you're at, perhaps taking the person away so it's a private space. That's the first point. You wouldn't want to kind of have this conversation in the middle of a footy oval or something when everybody's standing around. I think the other thing that's really important is to use I statements. So I statements are really helpful when you're trying to, I guess, share a concern or share something, because you're owning that statement. So my example I've got is I statement. So I have noticed, and that's when you explain what you've noticed. So the change in behaviour, I just wanted to see how you're going. So for example, perhaps there's somebody that's always been really high energy and really naturally extroverted and I guess infectious, and you sort of notice that they're starting to be a bit quiet or a bit withdrawn and they're not as bouncy as they used to be. So you'd say something like, I've noticed that you've been really tired lately. I just wanted to check that you're going okay. Is there anything I can help you with? Versus, seeing somebody, that same person, being really tired and withdrawn, you saying in the middle of everybody or the middle of training going, oh, you're always tired. It looks like you don't want to be here. You can sort of see how the two different questions would have very different outcomes. So I think making sure that you've approached somebody in a safe space where there's not many other people around, that's number one. And then I've noticed, explain what you've seen, and then I just want to check in and see how it's going. I think the important thing, though, to note is that if you are ever worried about anybody, a young person, anybody in your community, their safety or their well-being, talk to key people in their life. And if you're concerned, really encourage you to contact the emergency services or seek advice from professionals.
Thanks, Kylie, for providing athletics clubs with some education on mental health. Next up, we've got CEO of Little Athletics Victoria, Anthony McIntosh, to speak through what COVID has been like for athletics clubs and what it means moving forward.
Hey, it's Anthony McIntosh here from Little Athletics Victoria. It's my pleasure to be able to join you at the Leisure Network's Athletics webinar. And before I start, I should commend Beckley and the team at Leisure Networks for this initiative in putting together this information at a timely time and opportunity. I've been asked to speak about COVID recovery, impacts and strategies, and this is an evolving space. Of course, it's I don't need to inform anybody about how serious and how significant the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic have been for Little Athletics, for athletics generally, for community sport, and for the broader Victorian, Australian and global communities. It is a pandemic after all. Nevertheless, great to see that with vaccination rates rising and the risks of infection generally across the community starting to come down, that society is returning to normal, and the same is the case for athletics. Of course, Little Aths has just commenced its season. Would typically commence in sort of late September, early October, as you'd be aware, but we've been delayed a few weeks this year because of the ongoing COVID-19 restrictions, all in the name, of course, of keeping people safe and preventing infection. So with regards to the impacts of COVID-19 on our sport, the main one, I think, is the level of uncertainty that COVID-19 and the pandemic has actually caused our sport, and this would apply to every community sport, presumably. But the legal directions change and evolve more slowly at the moment, but at one point a couple of times a week. And so keeping tabs on the rules, the government issued directions via the Chief Health Officer and their application to community sport and Little Athletics was at one point, going back a few months, particularly challenging. And so what Little Aths would have to do is actually convert that legal speak into rules and protocols about how the sport could be run safely and healthily and risk-free, and give people confidence, in particular our committees. And if our committees don't get the right information, they don't have the confidence to run the sport, and the administration of the sport duly suffers, as does the community participation in our sport. So keeping the communications up to our centres in particular and to our members was particularly important. It's very, very difficult to explain as to sometimes why. The purpose for those protocols, and sometimes we didn't understand what the reasons for those directions were, but we're simply trying to apply them to the little athletics space. And so sometimes those rules were particularly divisive. It was a case of damned if we do and damned if we don't, and so that was so as a result, issuing the protocols and the rules, we just had to be really clear and unemotional about how it was done, provide the facts, and in the context once again of the health and safety aspect of the rules and their application, and try and provide them as best as early as we could. Of course, getting back to that uncertainty point, the rules and regulations around COVID-19 tended to change our sport. We had to modify particular rules about how we went about things. Things like hand sanitation, wiping down implements, sharing the inability to share equipment, those sort of things, foreign to our sport, but it did change the nature of our sport and upset a lot of people. It's not how we'd like to conduct our sport, but once again, under the guise of being safe, this is what we had to do. Right up to cancelling events because we're simply unable under the conditions to run championship events, for example. Even up to this season, we've cancelled our region and state relay championships. Not something that we'd ever want to do, but we were simply unable to run those events under the conditions, under the legal conditions that were provided by the state government. So the potential changes on the sport really were created a sense of fear and uncertainty around the future of our sport. There's also, with that, people in sports hold. They're custodians, of course. All of us are passing through our particular sports at a point in time, but we're custodians of our sport, and most of us wish to actually pass the sport on to the next generation in a better way than what we found it. And with the pandemic, that's been particularly difficult, particularly challenging for our committees who have been on watch, of course, during this time. That's a difficult thing for them to swallow. So having them actually face up to that reality that there are lots of things within our sport are beyond our collective control, from the state, national level, state level, right down to centre level. It's a very, very difficult thing for people to get used to, and not something that we'd ever want to get used to, for that matter. We're used to being in control of our sport and forging our own destiny. The pandemic has not allowed us to do that. For some families, there is a fear of personal safety for themselves, for their particularly for their kids that are involved in little athletics, in terms of having their kids participate in a public group activity. The fear of infection has taken many parents, many of our existing parents, some time to get over, and as a result, our retention in season 21-22 has been down compared to other years, because I think there's quite a few of our parents that are sitting back waiting to see what's happening with the pandemic and with COVID infections in the community, but it's caused them to sit back and watch and before they actually decide whether going back to little athletics in our case is safe. Happily though, our new athlete registration process is going particularly well. So whilst retention down, we've also had the Olympics, of course, in the last few months, which in any given 4-year period would give us a bit of a blip, and perhaps we're seeing a little bit of that too. So we're thankful for that. On the flip side, there are many families out there with kids like mine trying to push their kids out the door and get them involved at the first opportunity in community sport, and we have lots of those parents too. So they're more fearful, of course, of the impact of their kids through not getting involved in acts as opposed to those who fear the risk of infection from getting involved. So we're a broad church, of course. There's all sorts of spectrums of responses to the pandemics, but we do have a fair bit of that too. So once sport has been able to commence, then many of our families thankfully have supported their centres and jumped back in as soon as they can. Of course, at the moment, we up until this point in time, we've a dozen to 20 odd centres that have had experienced an infection at their centre, And so Little Lass has provided, being very upfront in providing the government rules as they apply to Little Lass and workplaces for that matter to our centres, so they can navigate this tricky process of reporting a COVID infection and navigating their way through what actions have to be taken. Of course, most centres have not had the experience of dealing with the Department of Health, with WorkSafe, with their venue manager in a context like this. And of course, all of those agencies will have different responses, and our centres are learning very quickly how to navigate those processes. And on a couple of occasions, we've had centres with multiple infections. So thankfully, at this point in time, all those infections have been related to known school infections, and so Department of Health have been less concerned about little athletics infections as say they may well have been around school infections. So we're thankful for that. But once again, like all of these protocols that our centres have had to get used to, they look daunting. But once they've had a go at navigating their way through, doing it for a second time, third time, fourth time is far less daunting, and it becomes a known factor for them, become far more confident, and onward we move. So I would never hope that our COVID protocols become business as usual. I hope we revert back to pre-COVID settings as soon as we can. Nonetheless, we do have them for the time being, and our centres are doing an amazing job at navigating their way through those. So that's a brief summary of impacts. In terms of strategies, Little Lass has always taken the position that it would follow the government advice, follow the advice of the Chief Health Officer. We're not trying to be contentious, but we do absolutely accept that we aren't the experts in this space. Whilst we know all about little athletics, we don't know about public health settings necessarily. So we've always followed what the Chief Health Officer has put out in terms of those directions, and as do most other sports. And so as a result, we figure that's the best way to go as far as keeping our parents and our families and our committees and all our other stakeholders in Little Lass healthy and safe and with the lowest risk of infection. What we definitely do, and most people won't see this, but in the background we lobby the government hard for certainly consistency and clarity of application of their rules. And when there are rules that don't make any sense, we certainly don't have any issue in going back to the state government through Sport and Rec Victoria and Vic Sport, which is the peak body that we work very closely with of Victorian community sport, to actually make these points. And so we, along with many other sports, will regularly do this, and often we'll see that our position, our requests have materialised in those directions coming down from the state government, for which we're thankful. So we've got a really good relationship with the state government that we leverage pretty heavily to make sure that we get our messages being heard, and that the protocols that we follow actually are making sense from an infection, a COVID management perspective. As I mentioned before, we draft and provide a clear set of COVID-19 protocols whenever we need to. So that's usually as soon as possible after the release of the Chief Health Officer's formal directions. We convert those into Little Lass speak and we put them out. So, but once again, whilst they might seem overly officious and heavy-handed, we do, the emphasis is primarily on health and risk management and not on anything else. It's not about providing unnecessary rules, because in Little Lass, as everyone knows, we've got plenty already, but it is about managing our health and risk settings. It's about providing support to our centres. So just to follow on from the point I made before, these protocols are not easy to follow, and when we first started issuing these, some 18 months ago, they were really difficult to follow, and like lots of sort of semi-legal wordy documents are, the more you see them, the more sense they make. And so after 18 months now, I think a lot of our centres are very used to seeing the types of documents that we issue and the language that we use and the sort of settings, and for the most part 98% of the documents usually are the same from issue to issue, from sort of month to month. And so people are used to seeing a bit of consistency in the same sorts of rules, and when they do change slightly, those changes are fairly minimal. And so centres are getting used to actually working within the confines of those rules, appointing COVID-safe officials, having hand sanitizer, cleaning schedules and rosters, wiping down high touch surfaces, cleaning implements, all those sort of things we didn't have, of course, 2 years ago, but we do at the moment, and they'll be here for at least the short to medium term, I would think. But our centres are doing wonderfully well at actually working within those protocols. Another thing that's worked particularly well for us this season is our trial athlete procedure. So we've got lots of athletes that are wishing to try the sport, and having a trial athlete process where within a 28-day period an athlete can trial the sport twice at their centre of choice gives them a safe way to actually sample a sport, and a safe way to exit to, and a safe way to sign up if that's what they want to do. So we've had 7,000 odd trial athletes register with us. They don't have to pay, of course, it's free of charge, it's free trial. We've had 7,000. A significant number of those will convert over to new memberships, which we're pretty excited about. So once again, emerging from COVID, parents are looking for safe COVID options, and the trial athlete procedure certainly gives them a means in which to dip their toe in the water of sport, sample a sport, and to be confident that that the committees of the centre that their kids are competing at are doing a safe and responsible job. One of the other things that we do also, of course, is in our social media messaging and marketing is we emphasise the fact that we're a COVID-safe sport. We're outdoors, we play in large fields, people are spaced apart, and the nature of our sport is certainly not as risky from a COVID infection perspective as say other sports might be. So we certainly emphasise those things, and I think that there's a certain market out there for which are receptive to those types of messages. So just in conclusion, we are in December now, and our start of our season, we typically sign up members for the most part through the October and into November. That's been delayed about 6 weeks this year, but we're just about to tick over the same numbers, or exceed actually the same numbers of members that we had in the previous season, which is really, really pleasing. So look, and I think our centres have done a wonderful job in once again rebooting the sport from pretty much nothing a few months ago back to where we are now. So they're resilient. They bounce back really quickly. We're blessed to have lots of committees with some very, very dedicated families and things. So really, it's about ensuring that they have the tools and they have the support that they need to continue to navigate their way through whatever the pandemic actually throws us moving forward. So on that note, again, thanks very much to Leisure Networks for the opportunity to address the local athletics communities down in the southwest, and I look forward to getting involved in further opportunities if I'm given the opportunity. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks, Anthony. It was great to have you involved, and congratulations to all the clubs for navigating through the COVID-19 period. Next up, we've got our final topic for this webinar, delivered by Jessie Drever, the Coordinator of Community Development at Leisure Networks. This one's based on sponsorships to assist with clubs' financial viability.
So firstly, tonight we're going to have a look at what sponsorship effectively is, and when we look at this definition, it's really what sponsorship is now rather than potentially what it might have been in the past. I think previously, especially in community sport, sponsorship was really around businesses really giving money and potentially not always really even seeing or potentially sometimes even caring what the benefits were that flowed from that. They just wanted to, they had some kind of connection with community sports clubs. But look, especially as a result of COVID, we've seen that there really needs to be benefits going both ways, because those businesses that have sponsored sporting clubs in the past have also been really dramatically impacted by COVID. So they really need to see that they are getting some return from investment on the cash that they're providing sporting clubs. So that's what we've noted as part of the first element of this definition, is that it's really a business deal between two parties where both parties benefit from the arrangement. It's also important to note that sponsorship, especially of community sporting clubs, isn't an obligation of businesses. It's just because you run a business doesn't mean that you then need to flow some of your important resources into other community organisations. So that's something that really needs to be kept in mind for community sport is that you really need to show what the benefits that you can offer to businesses, rather than just say, well, look, we're a community club, we expect you to at some point look to put cash into us. As we said, we touched on, there needs to be benefits going both ways. They need to see that there is actual real value if they are going to invest in a sporting club in terms of providing sponsorship. And flowing from that and making the most of your sponsorship arrangements and ensuring that you can get those really key sponsors in the door is really having some thought through planning and careful attention to your sponsorship arrangements. All right, so the next step in the session is we're going to go through the ways that you approach sponsorship, and then within the context of kind of how do you find sponsors, how do you keep them happy, how do you retain them, and going forwards, how do you build on that relationship. So what we wanted to kind of note to start with is that we look at obviously two different approaches to sponsorship. Firstly is re-engaging or retaining your current sponsors. The second element that we're going to look at in terms of the approach to sponsorship obviously is recruiting new sponsors or connecting with future potential sponsors. And that's a really important thing that we're going to note is don't just look at new sponsors for the right now and the immediate short term. Also have a look at finding that funnel of new sponsors moving into the future. All right, so what we've done to help you in terms of your securing sponsors, keeping your sponsors happy, and obviously retaining sponsors, we've broken it down into a bit of a game plan. So 7 steps to this, and we're going to work through each of them on separate slides. Look, it is really important to have a target in mind for the sponsorship funds you're aiming to secure. So is this itself built into your budget? Do you sit at the start of the year and think, okay, well, this is the target that we want to reach in terms of sponsorship funds, and this will help us in terms of the way that we want to operate and what we want to do within that particular financial year. It also helps from planning perspective, and for those that are responsible for securing the sponsorship, they have some kind of goals in mind as to what they're going to achieve. So as part of this, obviously ask yourself, what are the sponsorship funds being used to cover, and what costs do you need to cover that? And as we touched on, what do payment terms look like? So what do you ideally need as a club? Is it okay for you just to say, okay, well, if we approach our sponsors typically in September, that we're happy for all our funds to come in October, just as big lump sum payments, and then we don't have any other sponsorship payments throughout the rest of the year? Or is it more financially responsible for us to have more of a trickle in terms of the funds? So they're broken down into quarterly payments, half-yearly payments, and monthly payments potentially, just so you can potentially have more of a consistent cash flow rather than one big lump sum and that's it for the year. The second part of the game plan that we put together, and it flows a little bit from the budgeting and really setting the groundwork, is what are the benefits or sponsorable assets that you can actually offer as a club? So once you have in mind a target of the financial and non-financial support that you're aiming to secure, then it's really important to actually prepare a bit of an audit of the sponsorable assets that you offer. So some examples of this are naming rights. So it might be an event. More and more so, especially in the current age, is online brand presence, especially those clubs that use social media and their websites really well. Offline assets, so offline brand presence, it might be kind of the signs within your facility. You might have signs around your club's facility, uniforms, so on your playing uniforms, on your club's merchandise. It might be hoodies, t-shirts, beanies, those kind of things that when we talk about a uniform perspective. Stickers kind of fit within that as well. For those kind of businesses within the community that sell products, there might also be the opportunity within your club's operations for them to actually sell their products, whether it's at a bar, your canteen, club events, game days. Once you've kind of done that audit, really, really important to actually keep a register of these different assets. And it should be detailed around kind of what you think the value of that asset is. And if you then sell that asset to someone as part of a sponsorship arrangement, keeping up-to-date details of that, so you know at any particular period of time what you have got available to potentially sell to someone. If someone walks into your door and says, we're a new business there, we really want to be involved with your club, we'd love to sponsor, what can we potentially get us some benefits? You can really quickly go to your list of assets and say, okay, well, this is what we've actually got to offer at this point in time, and start to keep note of that. Okay, so you've now got a budget in mind in terms of what you need as a club. And you've also got a list of the assets that you can actually offer or sell. So the next step is preparing a sponsorship plan that ties all of that together for a particular period of time, whether that is for the upcoming season, whether it's for a financial year, whether it's for a calendar year. It depends on how you want to operate as a club. But your sponsorship plan should really cover off within that who you are potentially going to target. So a list of kind of businesses or individuals that you're going to target as a club as part of your sponsorship plan for that period. What you're going to potentially include in your sponsorship packages as part of that period of time. So what can you offer as part of your sponsorable assets? What packages might you want to build around that? Have a think about what you can actually do as a club from a risk perspective in terms of the length of the sponsorships. And then within your sponsorship plan as well, think about who's actually responsible for the management of all your sponsorship arrangements. Is that, does it sit with the committee more broadly? Does it sit with a couple of individuals within the committee? Does it sit with people without or outside the committee? So can you potentially appoint a sponsorship coordinator? Do you have a bit of a mix of all of them? So you've got a sponsorship coordinator that reports into someone on the committee that their responsibility is more around the general oversight of sponsorship as well. All right, so building off the sponsorship plan that we've developed, so we have an idea, obviously, the kind of targets we want to hit. We have an idea of what we're looking to sell, and we understand the kind of businesses or people that we want to target as part of our sponsorship plan. You can then go through the process of actually designing the proposal that can be circulated to targeted businesses or individuals for opportunities. It's important to think about when we're designing a proposal, have a think about, will you prepare a targeted proposal for a particular business or individual? Will you have a more generic proposal with different packages to choose from? Or will you potentially even have a combination of both? So maybe for your larger scale sponsorship packages and your larger scale assets that you're looking to sell, you might be more targeted as part of that. And if you're looking to target bigger businesses that you can see potentially are more likely to invest more funds, that you really need to be specific in what you're going to offer them, what they can offer you, and what's included within that. Whereas potentially your lower tier proposals kind of more can fit within that generic proposal and generic packages. Once you've kind of figured out the type of proposal that you're looking to develop, then really look at what you're actually going to include in that proposal. So especially for potentially businesses that don't know a lot about your club, or for the bigger scale packages that you're looking to put together, or the bigger scale businesses that you're looking to secure arrangements with, it is really useful to really show who you are as a club and give information at the club. So build that connection through photos, testimonials, branding, put all the color kind of schemes of your club in it, club logos, all that kind of stuff that really gives them, they pick it up and they know kind of straight away the kind of club that you are and what you stand for. And so you can potentially hook them in straight away because they say, oh, this is a club that aligns with kind of our values and what we stand for as a business. And we noted that lastly, kind of the benefits of the club, that obviously there is, don't be afraid to kind of set that out as well, that you are going to see obviously as a club benefits and potentially outside the cash. So don't just say obviously that we need funds, but if you're happy to kind of outline what the funds are going to be used for, they can kind of see, oh, there's some kind of social responsibility about the use of our funds. It's not just funds that go into the bank. It is actually being used for certain reasons. So that can be really beneficial as well. All right, step 5. So we've gone through all the steps. So we've budgeted, we've done the audit, we understand what we're trying to sell, we've put the plan together around all of that, and the proposal's now gone out to our targeted sponsors. But now the next steps are also really important as part of that process as well. So it is really important that you have an agreed framework, whether that be a formal agreement or for the smaller sponsorships or the smaller clubs, at least a basic document that's agreed by both parties. And you have that in place for how the sponsorship arrangement will work. So within that, have a think about and documenting what will each party receive. Is it funds for the club? What benefits will the sponsor receive? And be really specific about that within your kind of your documented framework of the agreement. Have as part of that the payment terms. So at least you then get clarity as a club. You have some more confidence around what your cash flow looks like. And look, it's a bit of an ugly one to discuss, but it's something that from a risk management perspective is something that we need to outline, is build into that kind of document the ability to potentially terminate the arrangement if you need be. Hopefully you don't get to that point, but especially from a branding perspective and an image perspective, It happens from time to time that businesses go through issues. They have their own problems. Those problems might become public. They might be something that you get to the point where you think, hang on, this business no longer aligns with our values. You want to have the right, if possible, to kind of terminate the arrangement. So using that sign example again, that if that business is then seen as having a poor image in the area, you don't want to have to then be tied to having that sign around your club for the next 3 years because you've agreed to that in terms of sponsorship arrangement. So having the ability to terminate if need be can be really important. They'll probably ask for the same thing from you, obviously, as a club, that they don't want to be tied with a club that is seen as having a poor image, but that's part of having some kind of mutual benefit as part of the relationship. So would recommend that if in terms of that risk management process. All right, so now we're at the point where we're actually underway in terms of our sponsorship arrangement. So you're getting the benefits from the sponsors and they're getting their agreed benefits as well from you as a club. It's really important you build in some kind of reporting mechanisms now that you actually are underway as well. Look, whether the sponsors report back to you on kind of their benefits, at least you as a club take responsibility and ownership of what you report back to your sponsors, because, and especially within the context of COVID, sponsors are becoming more and more aware, obviously, of the money that they're outlaying, because they've been impacted just as much in some instances as sport has in terms of their financial position from COVID. So they want to really see that they're getting a return on their investment. So as a club, look at ways that you can really capture data to show this as part of the reporting process. In terms of the report itself, there can be a range of different ways that you can approach that, and look, that can vary on the size of sponsorship. So obviously, if you've got a large scale sponsor that invested quite a bit of funds, put a bit more time and energy and effort into the way that you report back. So that might be kind of a bit more of a detailed report, might be kind of a 3 or 4 page report that outlines some of the benefits and the status of the sponsorship arrangement, down to it might be a simple email at a lower level sponsor. They're just as important because they've obviously invested funds, but also you can still give them the information that they need without having to put as much time and energy into that. And look, the last step in our sponsorship game plan is the review process. A little bit different to reporting. So reporting is, I guess, the more regular interactions that you have that kind of give the feedback on how, at any certain point in time, how the relationship's going, what the benefits are looking like, flowing both ways. The review process is more kind of when you get towards the end of your sponsorship plan period, whether that's a calendar year, season, financial year, or the sponsorship term. Have a look at and take stock of where you're positioned as a club with your sponsorship arrangements. So have a think about what can you do to lock in sponsors for longer terms potentially. Have a look at your audit that you've put together of your sponsorable assets, and have a think about maybe what else you could sell. Can you add to that list? Do you need to potentially look for sponsors in different areas or move away from certain current sponsors? That might be because they might have kind of shifted in terms of their values, their operations, that start to move away from who you stand for. It might be simply because you have now as a club engaged a whole new demographic of people through a particular service, and that you now need to kind of have sponsors that might more closely align with that, or that you might have opened yourself up to a whole new area of sponsors because you have that different demographic within your club. So take the time to actually have a think and do that review of where you then sit as a club. Look, in terms of content for the session, I just want to finish off with some really final tips to wrap things up. Look, one of the first things I said was that for most clubs at the moment, especially with COVID, any sponsorship funds are going to be really hard to turn away because participation's been affected, volunteers have been affected, a lot of sponsors have walked out the door. So those that are willing to stick by clubs or come and support clubs, it's very hard to turn away. But we would still urge clubs, especially as you bounce forward, to still have some kind of strategy and thought processes that you give to who you actually target as a club. So who, as a potential sponsor, has similar values and directions for the way you're heading as a club. What kind of sponsorship arrangements are going to be good for your club's image, and conversely, obviously, what isn't. So whilst at the moment you might be saying yes to every sponsor that's coming in, can you potentially get yourself to a point where you can be a bit more selective, and the sponsors that you have, and you have confidence in the fact that they all align with what you represent as a club. Obviously, touching on a few different points, but take the time to actually prepare a list of sponsorable items that you can offer as a club and do that audit. And really importantly, to keep that updated. You want to make sure that you have an idea of what's really valuable to offer. Have an idea, and whether that's through conversations that you have with other sports, other clubs within the same sport, your state sport bodies, have an idea of kind of within the assets that you have to offer, what each of them's kind of worth. And that might be hard to kind of figure out to start with, but as you kind of build on it, as you have conversations, as year by year, you kind of you have those different arrangements. You have the sponsorable items list that you've got. You'll get a bit more of an understanding as to what each thing's worth, which is really important for you to have as a club. If possible, have someone in your club that their sole responsibility is around managing sponsorships. It just means that they know that that's what their responsibilities are. You know who to turn to within your club when you need to have the discussion around sponsorships. And it is really clear from the perspective of sponsors looking to reach out to clubs and having that relationship going both ways, that there is that clear contact point, which is really important. And we will say within the context of that, it's important that person still documents. And when we said kind of one of the big challenges is around record keeping, really, really important that you are making sure that they actually keep accurate records, because if they leave for some reason, you want someone to be able to kind of fill that void really quickly without having to start from ground one because records weren't kept. And the last one that we've noted here is really important to regularly connect with current or potential sponsors to at least have an ongoing conversation. As I said, having conversations with other businesses doesn't mean that you have to have conversations because you want them to sponsor you now. There can be real value in having a conversation with a business just to build a relationship, because you see in a couple of years' time, they could actually be a really good sponsor for your club. So build that goodwill, have them around the club more often, build that relationship. So when you actually do go to them and make that targeted approach, that they're much more familiar with the club. They can kind of make that informed decision really quickly as to, yeah, this is something we're actually happy to do because we know what this club stands for. We agree, we're on the same page. This all sounds good, and they can make that quick decision. So real benefit in keeping that contact and conversation going with obviously your current sponsors, but your potential sponsors too.
Thanks, Jesse, for sharing your knowledge in the sponsorship space. That's a wrap for our COVID-19 webinar for athletics clubs across the Barwon region. We really hope you've taken some value out of it. If you do want to get in touch with us, please do not hesitate. Thank you.
If you would like any further information, including resources, tips, and downloads, jump onto Club Help. It's a really great resource for all things to do with local sporting clubs, whether that be volunteers, members, governance, finance. If you need any templates or guides, it's all in the one spot. It's a really great resource that you'll be able to use. So go to www.clubhelp.org.au.